Hey everyone, I'm Amelia, 28 years old and working as a social worker. And let me tell you, I have the best little brother in the world, Jake. He's 16 now, and even though we're not related by blood, he's been my partner in crime ever since my dad adopted him when he was just a little kid. Life was pretty great, until my dad married Victoria 3 years ago. From day one, that woman had it out for Jake. Nothing he did was ever good enough. He's not really part of this family, she'd say when she thought I couldn't hear. We should focus on having our own children. My dad, Robert, has been no help at all. He always takes her side, saying, "Amelia, honey, Victoria's just trying to adjust. Give her time." Yeah, right. 3 years is plenty of time to stop being a jerk to a teenager. Thank God for my best friend Nate. We work together at social services, and he's been my rock through all this. "You've got to stand up to her," he told me over coffee one day. "Jake needs you in his corner." I sighed, "I know, mate, but every time I try, Dad jumps in to defend her. I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle." Things got even more complicated last month when Jake's biological mom, Sarah, showed up out of nowhere, suddenly wanting custody. I thought, where have you been for the past 12 years, lady? But the real kicker came at our last family dinner. Victoria was in rare form that night. With her voice dripping with fake sweetness, she looked straight at Jake and said, "So Jake, I hear your real mother's back in town. Bet you're excited to go live with her, huh?" I saw Jake's face fall. "Victoria? I don't even know her. This is my family." But Victoria just laughed. "Oh, sweetie, let's not kid ourselves. You know you don't really belong here." I saw red. "That's enough, Victoria. Jake is as much a part of this family as anyone else." Dad jumped in, of course. "Amelia, don't raise your voice. Victoria's just stating facts." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Facts? The fact is Jake is my brother. Period. Victoria smirked. "Blood is thicker than water, dear. You'll understand when you have real children of your own." That was it. I shot up, my chair screeching against the floor. "Come on, Jake. We're leaving." As we drove away, Jake stared out the window, quiet. "Ames," he finally said in a small voice, You don't want me to leave, right?" My heart broke. "Never, kiddo. You're stuck with me, whether Victoria likes it or not." Little did I know, things were about to get so much worse. Victoria wasn't just mean, she was dangerous, and she was about to show her true colors in the worst way possible. The custody hearing was fast approaching, and Jake was a bundle of nerves. We spent the whole week prepping, going over potential questions and scenarios. "What if I mess up?" Jake asked, pacing around my apartment. "What if Sarah wins?" I grabbed his shoulders. "Hey, you've got this. Just be honest, okay? The judge will see how much Dad and I love you." He nodded, but I could still see the doubt in his eyes. That night, we ordered pizza and tried to relax, watching dumb comedies until late. As Jake headed to bed, he gave me a hug. "Thanks, Ames, for everything." I ruffled his hair. "That's what big sisters are for, squirt." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of retching. I rushed to the bathroom to find Jake hunched over the toilet, his face pale and sweaty. "Jake, what's wrong?" He looked up at me, his eyes glassy. "I don't feel so good." Before I could respond, he collapsed. Panic seized me as I dialed 911. The ride to the hospital was a blur. Jake was barely conscious, his body shaking violently. The doctors whisked him away, leaving me pacing the waiting room. After what felt like hours, a doctor approached me. "Miss Carter, your brother is stable, but we're concerned about the nature of his symptoms. We suspect he may have ingested a toxic substance." My blood ran cold. "You mean he was poisoned?" The doctor nodded grimly. "We're running tests to confirm, but yes, that's our current theory." I felt like I was in a nightmare. Who would want to hurt Jake? And then it hit me. The custody hearing. My hands shook as I called Dad to tell him what happened. While I waited for him to arrive, I overheard a familiar voice in the hallway. It was Victoria, talking to someone on the phone. "Yeah, the brat won't make it to the hearing now. Serves him right, trying to weasel his way into our family." I felt sick. She couldn't mean, but deep down, I knew. Victoria had done this. When Dad arrived with Victoria in tow, I couldn't hold back any longer. I confronted her right there in the waiting room. "How could you?" I hissed. "He's just a kid." Victoria's face twisted into an ugly sneer. I don't know what you're talking about, she spat. I heard you on the phone. You poisoned Jake to stop him from going to the hearing. I accused. Dad stepped between us, his expression hard. Amelia, that's a serious accusation. Victoria would never. Oh, please. Victoria scoffed, cutting him off. Even if I did, which I'm not saying I did, he's not really family. He's just some stray your ex-wife picked up. I lunged at her, but Dad grabbed me, holding me back. You're lying. I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. Jake is more family than you'll ever be. Dad looked bewildered. Amelia, calm down. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. I stared at him in disbelief. A misunderstanding. Jake is in there fighting for his life, and you're defending her. Victoria, ever the actress, burst into crocodile tears. Robert, I would never hurt Jake. Amelia's just upset and lashing out. I watched, sickened, as Dad comforted her. In that moment, I realized I was on my own. I'm going to check on Jake, I said coldly, turning away. Don't bother coming in. Neither of you. As I walked down the hall, I made a silent vow. I would protect Jake, no matter what. And I would make sure Victoria paid for what she'd done. One way or another, I'd expose her for the monster she truly was. After the hospital incident, I knew I couldn't let Jake go back to that house. Nate didn't even hesitate when I called him. Bring him to my place, he said. We'll figure this out together. Jake settled into Nate's spare room, but I felt a mix of relief and dread. What was I going to do next? We need dirt on Victoria, Nate said over late-night coffee. Real, solid evidence. That's how we'll expose her. That's how I found myself sitting across from Frank, a private investigator with a no-nonsense attitude. I'll dig, he said, narrowing his eyes. But are you prepared for what I might find? I nodded, jaw set. Whatever it takes to protect Jake. A week later, Frank called me in. Your stepmother's been married 3 times before your dad, he began. Each marriage ended with accusations of fraud and emotional abuse. I felt sick. How did she get away with it? Money talks, Frank said. But there's more. I found her second ex-husband, Tom. He's willing to talk. Meeting Tom felt like staring into a mirror of pain. Victoria destroyed me, he said, hands trembling. Emptied our bank accounts, turned my kids against me. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I'm so sorry, Tom. I had no idea. His eyes hardened. There's more. She's involved in a real estate scam, selling properties that don't exist and stealing people's life savings. My mind reeled. Do you have proof? Tom nodded and slid a USB drive across the table. Everything's on here. I've been gathering evidence for years, but I was too scared to act. I stared at the tiny drive, knowing it could change everything. But when I tried to tell Dad what I'd found, he shut me down. I can't believe you're still on this, Amelia, he said coldly. Victoria would never hurt Jake, and these accusations are insane. You need to let it go and come home. I felt the anger rise in my chest. Let it go. She poisoned Jake, Dad. Now I find out she has a history of fraud and abuse, and you're still defending her. Because she's my wife, he shouted, his voice cracking. She loves me. She wouldn't do these things. I shook my head, realizing that I might be losing my dad in this fight. I'm sorry, Dad, I said softly, but I can't ignore this. I won't let her hurt Jake again. I knew what I had to do. It was time to expose Victoria for who she really was, no matter the cost. I called Nate, my hands trembling. I need your help. We're going to take her down at the custody hearing. Nate's voice was fierce. I'm in. What's the plan? As I outlined what I had in mind, a mix of fear and determination settled over me. This would tear our family apart, but I had to protect Jake. And maybe, just maybe, I could stop Victoria from hurting anyone else ever again. We've got one shot at this, I said, my resolve hardening. Let's make it count. The day of the rescheduled custody hearing arrived, and my stomach was in knots. Weeks of gathering evidence had led to this moment. As Jake and I walked into the courtroom, I squeezed his hand reassuringly. When it was our turn to speak, I took a deep breath. Your Honor, before we discuss custody, there's something the court needs to know. I presented our evidence, Jake's hospital records, the PI's report on Victoria's past, and statements from her ex-husband. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as I laid out her history of fraud, manipulation, and abuse. Victoria's face contorted with rage. This is ridiculous. They're all lies. To my shock, Dad stood up. No, Victoria, it's time for the truth. His voice trembled. Your Honor, I've been blind, but Amelia's right. Victoria poisoned Jake. I found the evidence she tried to hide. Before anyone could react, the courtroom doors burst open. FBI agents entered, approaching Victoria. Victoria Thompson, we need to ask you some questions about a real estate development in Florida. As they led her away, I overheard snatches of conversation about a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The judge, clearly rattled, made his decision. After hearing how close Jake and I were and how strongly he opposed living with his biological mother, the ruling was clear. It was the happiest moment of my life when the judge awarded me custody of Jake. I was officially his legal guardian. Outside the courtroom, Jake hugged me tightly. We did it, Ames. It's over. In the weeks that followed, Victoria's carefully constructed world crumbled. Her high society friends abandoned her as news of her crimes spread. The real estate scam alone guaranteed she'd face years in prison. Dad tried to make amends, but I told him we needed time and space to heal. Jake and I focused on rebuilding our new life. We both attended therapy to work through the trauma, and I even started a support group for people from fractured families dealing with toxic relatives. We met weekly, sharing stories and offering comfort. It wasn't always easy, but watching Jake thrive made everything worthwhile. One afternoon, Dad called. Amelia, please. Victoria's lawyer reached out. She wants to apologize, to make things right. Can't we try to work things out as a family? I took a deep breath. No, Dad, some things can't be forgiven. Jake and I are happy now. We're safe, and that's what matters. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace. We'd been through hell, but we'd emerged stronger. Now we were finally free to be the family we were always meant to be. Looking over at Jake, diligently doing his homework at the kitchen table, I smiled. The road ahead might not be easy, but together we could face anything. And that was all that mattered. Now, here's a challenging question for you. If you were in Amelia's position, would you ever consider reconciling with your father, given his role in enabling Victoria's abuse? Or do you believe some betrayals are too deep to forgive, even when it comes to family? This is a complex moral dilemma. On one hand, forgiveness could lead to healing and rebuilding a relationship with a parent. On the other, his failure to protect Jake and his initial disbelief of Amelia caused significant harm and trauma. What would you do? Is there a point where family loyalty should be abandoned for self-protection? Or is there always hope for redemption and reconciliation? Share your thoughts in the comments.